So, Mr. Wells,
Mr. Sanderson,
food heist.
do you want a food heist?
You've told me that you got sent an excellent food heist. I know nothing otherwise about it.
This is not a food heist. This is a food fraud.
Okay.
But
it's food heist adjacent. We'll allow it.
It's for one specific reason. It's the most amazing one anyone has ever sent us.
Okay. Are they stealing something that you just absolutely love?
No.
Okay.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
And maybe this will not be as funny to everyone else as it is to me, but it's very funny to me. So this is maple syrup.
Okay, we already had a maple syrup food heist.
We've talked about the great maple syrup heist.
Yep.
This one is not a heist. This is a fraud. This is 1999.
Okay.
There was a guy who was caught in Vermont cutting his maple syrup with beet syrup.
Ooh.
Right?
Oh, I mean...
And if you're like a hardcore maple syrup person, that's unconscionable.
Yeah. And I would imagine they have good maple syrup over in Vermont, you know? It's not Canada, where this is probably a capital offense.
Yeah.
But...
punishable by death.
Yeah.
This guy actually only got 9 months. He got 14 months, and he only served 9. And then
9 months for cutting your maple syrup with beet.
Yes.
Okay.
And I have the original article from 1999. The pull-out quote from it is delightful. It says, former employees later told the FBI and federal prosecutors that Ames ran a Jekyll and Hyde company, one that packed pure maple products by day and at night secretly cut the syrup with beet sugar.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is.
You can tell they take their syrup very seriously.
Yes. And their journalism.
Yeah.
That's a good pull quote.
So now do you want to know the part that makes this endlessly delightful to me?
Okay.
This was sent to me by the dude's grandson.
Wow, we have a famous listener. Yeah. We have a listener who is directly
descended from
Food Heist Mafia,
the perpetrator of this heinous crime. Like the fact that people send food heists to me all the time now, and I love it when you do. Please keep doing it.
Yes.
This guy ratting out his own grandfather, I have not stopped laughing.
This is not ratting out. This is a mark of pride, right? That said, I don't know if white collar food heist embezzlement fraud, it's not fraud. Yeah. Gets you that much, right? Like,
well, so here's the last little bit of delight that I get from this. When the grandfather, the dude was sentenced and indicted.
Yep.
This guy's parents had to move up their wedding so that they could get married before he went into prison.
Okay.
And then 9 months later.
The children of the perpetrator.
Yes.
The parents of the grandson.
Yes.
Got it.
So the guy who sent it to me is the grandson.
Yeah.
His parents had to move up their wedding so that they could get married before he went to prison so that the guy could be there for it.
Right.
And then he was released from prison just a few days before the guy was born.
Well, very considerate police.
His gestation
there
lines up perfectly with his grandfather's internment. And
I will say this for the grandfather. It could have been corn syrup, which would have been even more offensive, right? He went with the classier,
the more
sophisticated food-derived sugar substitute.
Yeah.
Or vegetable-derived sugar substitute. I guess all sugars are vegetable-derived, are they not?
As far as I'm aware.
Yes.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, so.
Anyway, the guy told me, his name is Michael Bailey. Shout out to Michael Bailey, your infamous Jekyll and Hyde beet syrup grandfather. The grandfather has, Roger Ames is his name. He has unfortunately passed away since this happened. But Michael says, I would like to think that he would have appreciated being on your podcast as well.
Well, he probably spent 9 months or whatever it was in food heist prison. During the day, just being a kindly gentleman. But at night,
oh man,
he will make you bleed beet syrup.
That Jekyll and Hyde persona stuck around.
Yep. Yeah, he spent a good 8 or 9 months as the enforcer in prison.
If we are assuming, this food heist prison.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he was the enforcer.
Yeah.
I like to imagine he was the fixer. He was like,
Okay,
you
yeah.
know, Morgan Freeman in Shawshank Redemption, the guy who could get anything for you.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just every now and then he'd bring you something just absolutely drenched in beet syrup.
Beet syrup shivs. You could dry that stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this could be a useful guide. Think of
you
all the
want
stuff.
A poster of Raquel Welch or whatever?
Yeah.
Covered with beet syrup.
Covered with beet syrup, made out of it.
Yeah.
You know, you can dry that beet syrup, like I'm saying. You can make stuff.
Use it as paint.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That one was a stretch.
Anyway.
What are we talking about today, Dan?
Today we're going to talk about Moonbreaker.
Moonbreaker, which involves 0 beats.
As far as I'm aware, there are no beats.
So there are musical beats and the beats that you're putting down on your opponents.
Yes.
So
you lay a beat down while listening to beats. And if you're in Vermont, perhaps drinking beet syrup, whether you know it or not.
So what is Moonbreaker?
So Moonbreaker is a video game that you and I have worked on.
We have.
Yeah.
This is my second video game I've ever worked on. What about you? Have you?
What was your first one?
It was called Infinity Blade.
Yeah.
Yes.
I played that one.
It was a fun game.
Yes, this is my first video game.
Oh,
I have written for a lot of role-playing games. This is the first video game.
It's kind of surprising to me, with as much as you like to be involved in all different aspects of storytelling.
Yep.
And media and
I am
things
certainly
like that.
open to more video games that want to hire me, but
now you are busy being VP of a company now. Let's just point that out. What would you drop? What would you drop me for? What is your
you for?
Yeah. Like how some people have this one sheet pass. Like if there's like a video game company's like, hey, we need a VP in charge of worldwide narrative. What would make you be like, Brandon? Gotta take my out.
Okay.
Is it like League of Legends?
If I get offered showrunner on a Star Trek series,
okay,
I'm leaving you by the side of the road.
I didn't expect it to go there.
No, yeah.
We haven't talked
Not
Trek.
a staff writer.
Yeah.
But
Obviously.
showrunner, I'm gone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Which is a bad decision.
Yeah.
Because that would last me at the very most 7 years. And probably far fewer. And then I would just be an unemployed TV writer, which is not really a career goal of mine. I would still make the decision, but I would regret it eventually.
We do need to talk Star Trek sometime because we are uber nerds.
Yeah.
And we have not spent nearly enough time. There's actually a little quota they keep so that you can keep your nerd card of the Star Trek references that you make on your podcasts. And
Really?
We are well behind. Yeah.
Dang it.
Yeah, they've been pounding on the door.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound so loud because they have to do it like this. But,
So at this point, many years ago, when they first announced, hey, Disney's going to buy Lucasfilm and start making new Star Wars stuff.
Yes.
Which was, what was that, like 10 years ago that they
Yeah.
made that announcement? I thought, okay, that's cool. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
And then just a couple of months later, Paramount was like, hey, so guess what? We're going to make a new Star Trek series.
Yes.
And I went bananas.
Did you?
I wrote this gargantuan post on my blog. I did like, if I were in charge of Star Trek, here's how I would advance the storyline. And that was the point where I realized, I've always considered myself an equal fan of both. I am very clearly more excited about this.
All right, we need to talk about this and move Moonbreaker to the next episode.
Sorry,
Moonbreaker's next episode. Because,
okay.
I mean, we're deep into this. I didn't know this about you.
You did not?
I knew you liked it, but I thought Ben liked it way more. I hear Ben talking about Star Trek incessantly.
Never shutting up.
Yes.
No, I love Star Trek
Okay.
so much.
All right. Let's go down the classic Trek questions. Best captain?
Best captain?
Yes.
Are we, now you say this is a classic Trek question, but I assume this is not a question about classic Trek. We can include all of the series.
All the series, yeah. But who's best captain?
Oh, boy.
And is favorite captain different from best captain?
Favorite captain different than best captain. That's the thing, because favorite captain is going to be Sisko from Deep Space Nine.
Mine as well.
Absolutely.
Best captain.
But in best captain terms, I don't know if I would want to serve under Sisko were I a member of Starfleet.
Yes, and the number of disasters averted by Picard and things like that. Like this man is not a starship captain. He is like a force of nature, going about the galaxy, stopping disasters, planets from exploding, wars from breaking out, all with really nice speeches.
Yeah.
So I would have to say Picard's the best captain, and Sisko's my favorite.
Now, if we really want to get nerdy, I think there's a lot of fairly solid evidence that Picard, as a captain, is overly protective of his crew to the point that he hurts their careers.
Oh, yes. That's definitely an argument, but I would argue back that the effectiveness of the Enterprise during his tenure in, stopping the Borg from rewriting history.
Multiple times.
Right? From averting galactic disasters means that it's kind of okay if Riker doesn't get to be a captain. Like, his needs are outweighed by the needs of the many, to quote a phrase, to misquote a phrase. And so, yes, Riker suffered by being held onto by Picard. But when you find someone as effective as Riker, you just keep him on your staff. You don't let him go be a captain and advance his career. Well, you need him to, go down and get Zephyr Cochrane knocked around so that he can,
that he can help stuff out.
Yeah.
And one thing I love is that throughout the series, as early as season 3 and Best of Both Worlds, anytime you see Riker in command without Picard, he absolutely shines.
Yeah, he nails it.
Incredible captain.
Yes, he is.
And then later in the movies, and then in the Picard series, like, he's really good.
Yes.
And then Picard's like, nope, back in your place, boy. And I don't know. I like Picard a lot, but
all right,
I just think that's a funny aspect.
Keep going down the questions. I assume your favorite Trek then is Deep Space Nine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The only hesitance there is that 2 of the new series are really starting to give it a run for its money.
Okay. You mean Lower Decks and
Strange New Worlds.
Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lower Decks in particular this season, like I just watched the most recent episode this afternoon while I was eating lunch. It is absolutely hitting everything out of the park. Just nonstop home runs. Last week's episode was a straight up, like, full-blown epic YA novel in 22 minutes, done with cartoons about a robot named Peanut Hamper. And it was one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen.
I haven't seen a single episode of that, or I haven't actually seen a single episode of anything of the new Trek series.
Really?
Yeah.
Strange New Worlds is so good.
I have heard that, but part of me wants to support them in doing something, that the fans like. Part of me is just like annoyed with them that it's like, this is how you should have started, and now you come crawling back and saying, okay, we'll listen and do what you guys want, guys. You'll still pay attention, right? We need subscribers, please. And so I don't know.
Well, and Strange New Worlds is all by itself, merely by existing, the most brutal excoriation of Star Trek Discovery that could exist. It is everything that Star Trek can be, and it does it so well, and it does it by following the formula that everybody knew was going to work.
That Gene Roddenberry set up.
And Discovery is trying so hard. It is the edgiest teenager in the Forever 21, and it just it has yet to, even its very best episodes aren't as good as the mid-range Strange New Worlds episodes.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I will have to watch them. We'll do that at some point.
We'll do it live.
No, we will not do it live. No.
We would get copyright struck so quickly.
Yes, we would. All right. Keep continuing upon my list of obligatory questions.
What was your, by the way, favorite series? Was it also DS9?
Deep Space Nine.
Why? Because I think it's important to point out, and now that we've raised this specter, my favorite series, my favorite Star Trek is DS9, is absolutely the I went to an Ivy League school kind of way of talking about Star Trek, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's it's
How
kind
about
of a
this?
snooty thing to say.
My favorite episodes of Star Trek are Next Generation. And my
Okay.
favorite series is Deep Space Nine. I don't think this is as you say, this is not an uncommon opinion. The reason for this being is I am an epic fantasy writer and enjoyer, and continuity makes me love something more.
Yes.
Well done continuity. And I had been starved for well done continuity in the 90s because television refused to do it. And Deep Space Nine gave it to me.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. So there's that. I feel like as good a captain as Picard is, and he's just amazing, Sisko's more human. Picard gets some of those moments, which is why I really love First Contact, though a lot of hardcore Trekkies do not like First Contact.
Yeah.
I do, because I like the whole Picard having to be flawed and have issues thing. But Picard basically is Picard. He they explore him. It's not like he's not a character. He definitely has nuance and things like this. But Sisko is rough around the edges in ways that are interesting and make, for me, a more dynamic long-term narrative.
Well, and Sisko has to deal with the consequences of his own choices.
Yes.
In a way that Picard rarely ever has to do. And I think that adds a lot of complexity to the show and to the character.
I like the world building of Deep Space Nine. Next Generation will have occasional world building episodes that are good. But dealing with religion and an actual long-term alien species with, all of their politics and things like this scratches that epic fantasy itch. Gets better when Worf comes along, and you get to have, when Next Generation did this, it was often with the Klingons.
Yeah.
And you get to add that all into Deep Space Nine. You have some really interesting things with Dax and an entire species that's just very different. You can have an episode of original Trek or Next Generation that explores this interesting biology, but it's completely different to spend an entire series exploring it.
Yeah, and just really digging into the Cardassians and the Bajorans and eventually the Klingons and everything.
And it not to say that Next Generation doesn't do that, right? Like, it's very close up there. Data's exploration of what it means to be human is that sort of thing, and done very, very well. But that's why it just felt like a more mature narrative long term. Though my favorite episode of Trek ever is the flute episode, like a lot of people.
Inner Light.
Yes. And so, yeah.
Yeah. My favorite episode of all-time Star Trek is Darmok.
Oh, yeah. That's
also Next Gen.
Yeah. Very close to the top on my list as well. That might be number 2.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So before we totally leave the, continuity long-form storytelling question, in the 90s, at the same time, Babylon 5 came out and was doing the same thing. Were you a Babylon 5 fan?
I respect Babylon 5 quite a bit. And everything I've seen of it, I like. I was not the hardcore Babylon 5 fan, mostly because it did not align with my ability to watch television. So when it was on, I couldn't have the TV, or later on I was at college, I believe, and things like this. And so while Next Generation came on, like Sunday nights at 11 or 10, and I could watch from 10 to 11, and then it was my bedtime, I couldn't get to wherever Babylon 5 was, so I caught like episodes here and there. The same thing, happened with Doctor Who, where it's like over here, who knows which station is playing it occasionally. So I've seen smidgens of Doctor Who, and I've liked what I've seen, but I never became a super fan because
it's not as accessible.
That
was my experience with Babylon 5 as well. For whatever reason, and it may have been I had to choose like a certain number of hours of TV in Star Trek 1. It may have been just lack of ability to access it at the right time frame. I know in college, Ben and I were constantly trying to find free TVs that weren't already being used to watch Friends and ER.
I didn't see a lot of Deep Space Nine until I was roommates with Ben, and he showed it to me.
Okay.
I had really enjoyed it, and I'd followed it better, but those early college years, when it was on. It was really hard to find a
Yeah.
TV and watch.
Well, plus you and I served missions
Yes.
during the run of Deep Space Nine.
2 years
and
away.
Voyager.
Yeah.
I missed 2 years of both series. So I, a couple years ago, decided, this is at this point probably 5 or 6 years ago, thought it would be really interesting to go back and watch Babylon 5 because I had never seen it.
Yep.
And it didn't work for me.
Okay.
It's a show where I can absolutely see how it worked for other people, and I can see how it would have worked better for me as a teenager than it would as a 40-year-old guy. But yeah.
Do you know J. Michael Straczynski did a pilot for Dark One?
I did hear that.
Yes. Yeah. Didn't go anywhere. It's one of the books that Dan and I are working on together, but he did do a pilot for it.
Like filmed it or just wrote it?
Wrote it.
Wrote it.
It was really cool to meet him. Went to dinner a number of times, chatted about things. Smart guy, knows the industry really well.
Yeah.
I was very impressed.
Yeah.
So
everything that I've read of his, I have loved. I hope he doesn't ever find my blog in which I talk about Babylon 5 because
well,
it's fairly
Joe,
critical.
if you're watching this, don't go look at it.
Don't go look it up. Okay, so what are our next Star Trek questions?
Next Star Trek question is best movie and favorite movie
Okay.
across all, not counting New Trek. We'll get to New Trek as a
We
separate
can't
question.
count New Trek?
We can't count New Trek yet.
Okay.
Are you really going to put a New Trek
No,
movie as your
obviously the
bet?
best Star Trek movie is Galaxy Quest.
Okay. I don't agree. It's probably number 3 for
Okay.
me. It did make, they did a poll once at one of the big Star Trek conventions of best Star Trek movies, and it made the list above a bunch of them.
Yeah, it's because it's overtly and obviously a Star Trek movie.
But
I think it's amazing. After that, it is very hard for me to not pick Star Trek 6, Undiscovered Country. And that is
Undiscovered
my Cold War kid background shining through. I like a lot of the other ones. I would put Wrath of Khan up there. I would put First Contact up there.
Yeah.
Honestly, Star Trek Into Darkness, which is a new Trek movie, I would put maybe even top 5 with the
Into
rest of those
Darkness
that I'm talking
is
about. That's the third one.
Third one is
Yeah.
the best of the new Trek. Though the first one is not bad.
Yeah.
I like the first one a lot. So I had Emily watch Wrath of Khan because she'd never seen it before. We actually watched the episode first and then watched it, and it holds up. It's just it's a very well filmed, well made movie.
Yeah.
Paced very slowly by modern standards.
Definitely.
Which is not to its detriment, I would say. But I still prefer First Contact, which I understand to be a bit. I mean, I think that there's a war going on here. Some people don't like the yet again leaning on time travel, yet again leaning on the Borg, yet again, doing all these things, plus splitting the cast into 2 groups. Mixed with a lot of people don't like that Picard. Like, you can't, to them, have the quintessential Picard Star Trek movie unless it is a Picard gives a speech movie.
Yeah.
Right? Which I can totally understand. It is too bad that we don't have a classic Picard gives a speech and unites the galaxy movie.
The Winger speech Picard movie.
Because that's how he ends so many great episodes and things like that. And just diplomacy Picard, right?
Yeah.
Instead, all of our Picard movies are, well, it's in the theater, so he needs to hold a gun at some point in the movie. So he does.
Yeah, well, in First Contact, it works for me because, yes, it's kind of sensationalized. It's a more action-oriented Picard, et cetera, but also it is very overtly a story about him overcoming racial hatred.
Yes.
He deeply despises the Borg on an extremely intimate level, and it's a story about him coming to terms with that. I dislike the fact that every time a Star Trek writer needs to deal with obsession, they start quoting Moby Dick. Like, that just comes up over and over. And you can see why.
I mean, the
Patrick
naval...
Stewart saying, had my chest been a cannon, I would have spat out my heart upon him. Like, that's incredibly powerful. But come on. Khan did the same thing. We always go back to Moby Dick.
It's a really good book.
Well,
I happen to really love Moby Dick, like genuinely, not ironically.
yeah.
It's one of my favorite classics. So, yeah. But I just love it. I like that they split the narrative and that you have this kind of the sort of Star Trek. I won't say it's politics with Zefram Cochrane, but this kind of a little bit lighthearted, little bit, harkening back to Star Trek 4, sort of plot line, while this enormous zombie apocalypse is happening on the main ship, and Picard is being wrung out, and Data is being potentially turned, and all of these things. It works really well for me. It brings to a conclusion many of the things that I loved about the series. It made up for Generations, which was so forgettable that I can remember one scene from it, and it's one because it made me laugh in a ironic way. So that's my favorite.
Okay, and it's a very good one. It's absolutely in my top 5. What is your opinions of Undiscovered Country?
That would probably be number 2.
Really?
Yeah, I really like Undiscovered Country. I like Klingon stuff. I think it's fun and interesting for Star Trek to play with its long and weird history with the Klingons, and it did some very interesting, cool things with the Klingons and with an aging cast. And unlike Star Trek V, it acknowledges the agingness of them, and it plays with this idea of we're hanging on to our youth. Everyone is hanging on to it. It is time for this to be over with.
Well, and once again, I can't remember actually if 6 quotes Moby Dick, but I'd be surprised if it didn't.
It quotes Hamlet.
It quotes everything. And one of the running gags is that everyone attributes the famous quotes to their own culture, which I think is delightful.
Yes.
But, it is about Kirk, again, coming to terms with a racial hatred.
Yes.
And for me, coming out of the Cold War at that moment, like we have hated the Klingons forever and now we have to be friends with them.
Yeah.
Was incredibly powerful to me. And that helped me kind of figure out and navigate the politics of the time. I also love 6 because it is the redemption of Kirk.
Right.
Kirk gets unfairly, this is the soapbox that I will die on.
Okay.
Kirk is constantly and unfairly classified as, the reckless cowboy who makes out with chicks and solves every problem with a gun. That is true of Star Trek 3, 4, and 5.
Yes.
But it is not true of the original series. He was an incredibly rules-oriented warrior poet captain who, yes, occasionally would make out with a girl, but it was filmed in the 60s. You got to give them something. He was constantly enforcing rules on his own crew. Like he was a very staid and respectable captain until his best friend died and Star Trek 3 ran him off the rails a little bit. And in 6 is where he finally gets to be that kind of statesman again.
Right. I would agree with all of that. And so, yeah. Worst
Star Trek movie?
Worst Star Trek movie. So.
I mean, we're probably thinking of the same 2, but how do I choose between them?
Oh, I'm going to be so excited if we're
okay.
legitimately thinking of the same 2, which I guess that we are.
Star Trek 5 and Star Trek Beyond are both abysmal.
I think you've got Beyond and Into Darkness flipped in your head. Because I think Beyond is 3 and Into Darkness is 2.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
The second new Trek
movie
is the terrible one.
Yeah. Sorry for that correction.
And if I have those wrong, I've lost all my Star Trek cred, and that's fine with me. So I am going to say that between the 2 of them, I prefer 5.
Do ya?
Even though nothing works in 5.
Ooh.
5 at the very least has the 3 caballeros hanging out and cracking jokes at each
It
other.
does start and end with a nice scene
Yeah.
between three characters that we love, dealing with the continuity of Spock's resurrection.
Well, and it's trying to do new things, whereas
It's so bad.
New Trek 2
It's so
is
bad, though.
trying so hard to retread other things in foolish and incomprehensible ways.
One of the single best riff tracks I've ever seen. If you guys know riff tracks, this is Michael J. Nelson and his pals who did MST3K for a while. Started up, you can just listen to their commentaries on movies, and the Star Trek V one.
Is it amazing?
It's amazing because
I need to watch it.
If you are not a Trekkie and you're some reason still here, Star Trek V was written and directed by William Shatner.
Yes.
Who is a bit of a Renaissance man. He also wrote science fiction novels, maybe himself.
Tech War.
We're not sure.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I
writer,
own a
director.
copy of Tech War autographed by John Scalzi.
Oh, really? Well, there you go. Who knows? Maybe he wrote it. Yes, maybe he wrote it when he was 9.
No, I asked him at one of
Yes.
your signings to sign it because
Sign
I
it,
thought
yeah.
it was funny.
But regardless, I am going to flip those.
Okay.
Now they're very close. Because the mastery of everything but narrative on display in Star Trek Into Darkness is great. As happens with JJ's movies, really great performances, really great cinematography, great use of special effects. Everything about that movie works except for the fact that the movie doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
The story, the very loose hand that it plays with technology and with continuity and with everything else, it's just...
I will say this:
unforgivable.
Star Trek V is not insulting, and Star Trek II of the New Trek is a little bit insulting.
Yeah.
The way that Spock responds and acts, and the way that they deal with Khan and things just feels so ham-fisted.
Yeah.
That it's a bit insulting. So, but I will flip those.
I will say this: Alice Eve, who played, and I can't remember the character's name, the one who is in regular continuity, Kirk's ex-wife.
Okay.
She shows up in New Trek 2, and, you know, aside from the gratuitous, let's make Alice Eve show off her bra scene, which is, stop doing that, movies, her character's fantastic. And I was very sad that we didn't get her back again in the third movie because I thought she was a great addition to the cast. She added a lot to the group. Jayla in the third movie was really good.
She was.
But I wish we had Alice Eve back.
Was the third movie, maybe this is an Adam question, I want to say that it was written or directed by Scotty.
Yes.
Which one? Was it both? Or was
it was written by...
Written by...
I think all three were J.J. Abrams. Directed.
No, third one was not J.J.
It wasn't?
No, he left for Star Wars.
Maybe it was Simon Pegg then.
Yeah. Look that up for us. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did direct it, but I think he just produced it. I think he had jumped to Star Wars. So we're on the topic. General thoughts on New Trek, including Discovery and Picard as New Trek.
Okay, so first of all, we live in an absolute golden age.
Okay.
Just to before we start this portion of the discussion, I will cement my bona fides by saying that part of the reason I have relatively fond memories of Star Trek V is I actually read the novelization of it.
Oh.
And that's how big of a nerd I was.
Okay. Who wrote it?
I don't know.
Okay.
This was in high school. I didn't pay attention to authors.
They had some really solid authors on the Star Trek
they did.
books.
Some of them were very good.
Yeah.
I read a lot of Star Trek books. The living right now, when there are 5 Star Trek series in active production, even though 2 of them are terrible and 1 of them is half terrible.
What's the half terrible one?
Picard.
Oh, okay. What's the other terrible one then?
Prodigy.
What is that?
Prodigy is their quote-unquote middle grade series. It is a cartoon
Okay.
that's done in a style very reminiscent of like the Clone Wars cartoons.
Okay.
And it's about a group of
And
like
it's worse than Picard?
it's so
I
bad.
feel like we need a justification of half
gosh.
of Picard.
We'll get to them all. There's a lot to talk about. There's the 3 new Trek movies that I kind of feel like we've covered. The first one, we did a whole writing excuses episode about the first new Trek movie, Kelvin Timeline. I actually like it a lot. They did a lot of really impressive things. The way that they mirrored Kirk and Spock's character arcs so that they are essentially becoming like the other one and showing that that's how the friendship forms works really well for me. Chris Pine as Kirk worked really well for me. He's much more the space cowboy Kirk, but also the way they're screwing with the timeline justifies that because he grew up in a broken home with a deadbeat stepdad instead of with a wonderful stepdad who was a Starfleet officer. And so like there's justifications there. I think a lot of the casting is really, really good.
Yeah.
I like that one a lot more than a lot of people do.
I like it a lot. I think it, in some ways, like I think the third one is a better film, a better Star Trek film, but I might rank the first one above it simply because the task of recasting all of them and having it land is so difficult. And JJ did that so masterfully that the viewing experience of the first one was because I went in really skeptical and I came out of it saying, wow, that's great.
The part of the problem is that everything post Voyager has been struggling to be new.
Yes.
Or it's been struggling to be the same.
Yeah.
In ways that I feel are not necessary. And there's absolutely something to be said. The trifecta of Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager had established such a heavy world with a lot of baggage that it was very difficult to bring in new audiences. I can understand why that was problematic, and they decided, hey, you know what? Let's reset everything with Enterprise.
And I think that the first JJ movie, we'd have to look this up, but I think it was the first one that made real money.
Yeah.
Like, I want to say that its box office was 5 times what any of the other movies
I would not
been.
be surprised at all.
Find that out for me if you can get a list of those. But I remember looking at it once and just being like, whoa, it might only be like 2 or 3 times as much, but it was a multiple, I feel, more than any Star Trek movie had done before.
And so as much as I, as the Uber fan, wish that they had continued the story post Voyager, post Nemesis, I can see why they decided to do a reset on the world. And I absolutely can't fault them for doing that recast. I wish they hadn't. I wish they had done something new. But at the same time, I recognize that first...
I'm getting a
You've got it?
Adjusted for inflation if you want to go over.
Oh, they adjusted for inflation on this one. Okay.
I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for.
I wasn't, but
I don't know. Adjusted for inflation is still a useful thing.
with adjusted for inflation, the motion picture is the second highest, and Into Darkness is the highest. And then after that, they all cut by half.
Okay.
Even adjusted for inflation. Nemesis is so the top ones are around 400 to 500 million, and Nemesis is 87.
Because Nemesis is at the end of the day probably the very worst Star Trek movie. So bad that it didn't occur to me.
Oh yeah,
because my brain edits it out.
For me,
I would watch New Trek 2 or Star Trek 5 before I rewatched Nemesis.
I don't think I would, but it is bad.
Yeah.
And it's doing that same thing, which is you're talking about here, retreading ground. It's like, well, what resuscitated the original series movies? They killed the favorite character. Let's do that, and then we'll resurrect him.
And it's trying to do the same thing with the Romulans that Undiscovered Country did with the Klingons. Like, there's a lot of dumb stuff it does. But back to New Trek.
Mhm.
As much as I wish they had done something more innovative,
Mhm.
I think we absolutely have to credit those movies with the fact that we are now
Yeah.
in the golden age of Star Trek with 5 series in active production. It brought Star Trek back in a way that hadn't happened since Next Gen in the 80s, and I am grateful to it for that.
Okay.
So hooray for that.
Hooray for that.
Okay, so you have watched none of the 5 series, right?
None of them.
Prodigy might be better than I give it credit for. It is overtly marketed as a middle grade show for kids, and I hate every single character on it except for Janeway. And it might just be that I'm not in the right audience.
So
I'm not the
is
right demographic for it.
It following the original timeline, like if Janeway's in it.
So it is a bunch of kids from like a mining planet that were all like prison labor, and they find this old ship that has a hologram of Janeway.
Oh, okay.
And they all like abscond with this ship, and they go off having crazy adventures. Like, we're not Starfleet officers, we're just a bunch of weird alien kids. And our mentor, hologram Janeway, is going to teach us about life and how to be good people. And the characters are endlessly obnoxious. Like, the main character, I just can't stand. But again, I'm not
the target audience,
13 years old. I don't know if maybe, it's a huge hit for that audience.
Okay.
So,
I will have to watch some of these. I have not chosen to watch Discovery or Picard after seeing previews for them and clips and saying, nope, just not for me. So
Discovery is a show written by people who desperately wish they were writing for Battlestar Galactica instead. Or for Stargate Universe, or one of those really gritty, dour shows where no one's happy and everything is bad all the time. It is a very adolescent idea of how to make something important by making it sad. And part of the problem, and this is a double-sided problem because we're talking about money, Netflix, in exchange for the exclusive international rights outside of the U.S., the only way to watch Discovery is on Netflix. And they bought that by fully funding 5 full seasons of Discovery before any of it had been produced.
Whoops.
Yeah, which means that, first of all, we're guaranteed to get 5 seasons of Discovery, but it also means that there's absolutely no financial or evolutionary pressure for that show to be good or find an audience because it's already fully paid for by Netflix. And it absolutely has its fans, and there are aspects of the show that I really like, but it's just tiresome how edgy it is constantly trying to be. I will say this. Michelle Yeoh was on it for a few seasons, and I love her. Doug Jones plays Saru, who is absolutely one of my all-time favorite Star Trek characters. He's fantastic in everything he does. And Michael Burnham, while she is a terrible captain, is a really great character that I enjoy watching.
Okay.
In fact, a lot of them. What's his name? Michael Rapp? The guy, Anthony Rapp. He's a really fun science officer. Like, a lot of the characters work, but the show as a whole just doesn't gel together. Picard is in a similar space. They're trying to be different. They're trying to be, quote unquote, important and serious, and they just end up losing the formula that made Star Trek work in the first place. And Strange New Worlds is like, you know what? Fine. Like you said at the beginning, okay, you whiny audience, we're just going to do a real Star Trek show with bright colors and a cast that likes each other, and they use science to solve problems, and it's absolutely delightful. Everything about it works. As an example of how the two series. Like Discovery, because, it's a reboot back to like Enterprise era, they brought Harry Mudd back. Do you remember Harry Mudd?
I do remember
He was
Harry
the
Mudd.
goofball from the original series who was like always trying to steal things or con people. He's in 2 episodes, and they're both kind of jokey, funny episodes. They brought him back in Discovery. They got Dwight Schrute to play him.
Okay.
And he is dour and edgy and angry, and he is not fun in the least tiny bit, because Discovery has to be the edgy show. Whereas Strange New Worlds brings back Sybok from Star Trek V.
Okay.
And you only get like the barest hint of, Spock at the end of an episode is like, we need to look out because my brother is one of these dangerous like Vulcans who embraces their emotions, and he's going to be scary. And it's wonderful. The fact that Discovery made Harry Mudd not fun, and that Strange New Worlds was able to make Sybok seem ominous is such a stark and telling example, I think, of the difference in quality between the two shows and how they're handling Star Trek's history.
Awesome. I think Ben's going to love this episode.
I hope so.
Or he's going to be really angry at us for messing things up. So, how's that, Ben?